Interested in real estate? How about wealth? Well, they go hand in hand. And here, you'll learn all about it. Welcome to Be the Bank, a podcast where we discuss and debate the topics centered around real estate investing. Your host, Justin Bogard, shares insights into investing in real estate to create real wealth and passive income for you and your family. He'll share stories of real estate investments done right, walk you through the process of owning a real estate note, and most importantly, educate you so you can be the bank. This is Be the Bank, brought to you by BrightPath Notes. Now, here's your host, Justin Bogard.
Welcome to episode number 3. I'm Justin Bogard, and today we're going to be talking about really what it's like to be a note investor, kind of the journey and the life of the note investor. How active and passive is it really? You'll find out in just a minute. This episode is brought to you by BrightPath Notes. Hey, Richard.
How are you doing, sir?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Good. I understand you're getting a little bit of snow your way.
Yeah, we are. So out here in the Indiana, kind of north of Indianapolis area, there's a band of weather coming through, and we're going to keep hitting with a lot of rain today. And it's going to turn into ice in a couple of hours, and it's going to start to snow, and we should get a good stream of snow for at least about 24 hours.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, although you may like it. Kids like to go out and play in it and things like that. But I'm not going to be getting any snow north of San Francisco. So
Okay. I do like it. We have had a very mild winter here in Indiana so far. We've had one okay snow, and this is supposed to be a decent snow. We'll probably get between 8 to 14 inches of snow, we're guessing. But I'll tell you tomorrow, Richard, what really happened.
Okay. All right.
Richard, I want to get into this episode number 3 here. Thanks for being on our show again today for our guest today, and you'll probably be an ongoing guest in the future.
Always glad to be.
Well, we appreciate that. So being a note investor has its challenges. It has its fun points. It has its passivity points. And today I wanted to kind of get into a discussion with you on what realistic expectations, if you are getting into the real estate note investing business, what kind of expectations should you have? And I kind of want to start off the conversation of, Richard, you got a couple paths you can go down when you get into the note business, whether you want to invest your own money and just kind of grow your retirement, or you can actually make a business out of it, Richard, like yourself and what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose the path of creating a real estate note business. And so my journey isn't as passive as some people's journey is going to be in the note business. So I do invest in these loans. I do have my own portfolio, whether it's, in cash or whether it's in retirement accounts. And Richard, I assume you have the same thing. So I also kind of had an educational platform here, and I also have this podcast that I do, and I kind of reach out and I show people kind of what I do and where I'm at. So my journey is a little more active. So I would treat my note investing experience, Richard, as more like a job.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I would say the same for mine. I mean, I made the choice early on. I had the ability to have a day job and to do notes also. I think that anybody who wants to have a day job and invest in notes will, as you can imagine, will find out that their learning period will be a lot longer. Not that we're always not learning in doing investing in notes, but you just physically don't have as much time to spend on it as you would if you're doing it full time. My goal when I got started with this was to basically cover all my expenses in my first year, which I was very lucky. I happened upon 3 different transactions, sort of all within the course of about 4 months. And I did just that. It was a trial by fire. I would not suggest that anybody do it again. It was not pleasant. I had problems with lawyers. I had problems with the deals. I was a newbie. I mean, what is it? The guy who's just gone over the Niagara Falls in a barrel and made $1 million
Right.
because of it. He says, I would not recommend, you're making $1 million this way. Um, you know, but that's what I did. And that's how I got into it.
So I see a lot of people get into the note business and they fall into, I won't say a trap, but they'll fall into a mindset of they want to do too much too quickly because they see the potential, they see the possibility of them making some good passive income or them making some transactional income. And they kind of jump in feet first, if you will, but they kind of jump in feet first with their entire wardrobe and all their accoutrements behind them, right? And they just bring everything with them at full steam, which is a great being rambunctious, but I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do when you get into this business. I like the idea of if you're trying to learn how to do this, you still have a full-time job, you receive your W-2 income, but you also have some time on the side to where you can kind of educate yourself and kind of build and build and build as far as your knowledge base. And obviously you can build your income, but you also have that security of knowing like you got some income coming in from your day job. And then you're also trying to figure out how to work this business on the side. And then eventually it can balance to where, hey, maybe that income on the side is going to outweigh what you do with your W-2 income. And then you got a lot more time freed up. Let's say 40 hours a week are freed up to go and do this business how you want to do it. And maybe you're just well off enough, Richard, to where you can just invest your money full time and not have to go out and raise money. Don't have too many of those people out there, but.
Yeah, I totally agree with that model. And unless you are somebody who is, say, a little bit older, or you happen to have done extremely well in crypto or some other way, and basically you've got your daily net covered.
Yep.
So whatever you do is surplus for income. But yeah, I've had a number of, it's interesting. It's IT guys tend to do this. They come to me and say, oh, I've been in IT for 25 years.
Right.
I've made enough money. I want to get out and I want to be covering my expenses in a year's time. And I'll say, don't bet on it.
Right.
I usually tell people if they jumped into this full time, they should really plan on 3 years before they're truly covering their expenses and up and running and comfortable in what they're doing.
That's a good number. 3 years. That's realistic. So it kind of gives them a way to where they can phase themselves out of a W-2 job and phase themselves into like a note business if that's what they want to do. Or like you said, if they've just blew it up with crypto, they've got just an amazing amount of money just sitting there to deploy. It can become a full-time job just deploying your own capital if you had enough of it. So Richard, let's say we had $2.5 million of money that was just your money in your portfolio that you had to invest. And you can do some larger one-off transactions, right, Richard? You can probably invest in like, your neighbor's house in California where, the median price home is what, $1.125 million.
Right.
You could spend your money like that, or you can divide it up amongst and spread it out over a diversified portfolio of Midwestern assets where assets are more like $50,000 to $150,000. And then you can have, a more balanced portfolio like that. So what I'm trying to say, Richard, is that when you have, let's just say, $500,000 to invest with, that's pretty manageable and that's pretty easy to work and be pseudo passive with it, right? You kind of have some activity when you buy these investments, you're doing due diligence on them. You're closing on the deal, signing documentation, then you're sending your funds over. Then after that happens, you have all these post-transactional items that are going on as far as getting documentation, auditing that documentation, recording that documentation, then having, a servicer service the loan as well to collect the payments from the borrower. And so that all process, it sounds like a lot. It's not too bad after you get used to it. But imagine doing that, Richard, over several loans at the same time. That becomes a pretty arduous task right there.
It becomes an arduous task, and you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you don't know. And the servicer will do some of it. Servicer won't do some of it. And
yeah,
when you get on the other side of maybe 10 transactions, you can say, all right, fine. I got this down. I know what's going to happen. But before that, you don't know who's recording what, if you're supposed to record it or the
Yeah.
servicer does, what gets filed where, what gets filed. Do you record an assignment or not? All this type of stuff. So the learning curve can be sort of steep. So you're really,
Yeah.
if you've got a current job, sort of as you said, where you can maybe go to halftime or something like that, and then devote the rest of your time to notes, that's kind of a perfect world, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good balance of both, where you still have the security, but you still have the passivity of growing that money, that retirement nest egg, if you will, and growing it passively and doing it in a slower manner. Now, there's some people that are just gung ho, Richard, and rambunctious, and they want to get in there and do it. I may have been one of those people, Richard, that has done that. Okay, I know you alluded to what you did when you started out in the note business. But it's just a culture thing, right? You want to get in there, you want to jump in 2 feet first. You want to take your whole army with you and just go at it full steam. And then you run into a bottleneck, right? There are things that you just don't know that happen with the certain states and certain counties and the way that they record documents. Richard, I have a special custodian that I use that handles all my documentation, from getting the recordings and producing documentation when I convey notes from one seller to another, or from me, the buyer. And they still get documents rejected by the county for whatever reason, right? They're just, in Indiana alone, there's like 92 counties. So just imagine if you're working across all 50 some states, and they all have 60 to 120 some counties in them. That's a lot of different personalities, and that's a lot of different nuances and different regulations and processes that each of them have. So there's always some new thing that's a new challenge with them, that it takes a minute sometimes to get your documents recorded. I've had documents take 6-7 months to get recorded sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I had one when COVID first started, and this was in Indiana, as a matter of fact.
Really?
And so in one of your fair counties there, which I won't talk about, you have to hand carry your documents in to get them recorded.
That means you can't electronically record it. That means you can't mail it in, right? You have to have an individual personally deliver that document to the county in front of the recorder, so they can stamp it, and then you pay your filing fee.
Yeah. And so I was very surprised to find this out. I talked to the recorder there, and I said, well, how do you get this done then if you're like me in California? And I said, well, you hire somebody local. And long story short, there is a whole cadre of people who do nothing but hand carry documents in to get them recorded. But guess what? It was COVID. You couldn't go in to record because the offices were closed.
So what do you do in that instance, Richard?
Yeah. I'm sorry?
So what do you do in that instance? That's a great little story we got going here.
So what they actually did was they had set up a sort of an inbox situation, where the hand carrying person would go in and set it on one side of the counter, and the inbox, and then they'd have to leave, and the other person would come in, and they would accept the doc, and blah blah blah. But weeding through all that for your first time, you don't know, and things like that arise. So that's something that you have to count on. That's going to happen. One thing also,
Richard. Sorry, Rich. I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I'm going to recap what you just said. On my side of things, it sounded like the internet kind of garbled up pretty good while you were talking. The gist of what I heard, Richard, was basically that in that process to where COVID happened and you have to hand in documents, they set up like an inbox for you to leave the documentation there. Then they go through the process and they get it taken care of. And then you kind of pick up later. I believe the individuals that do these things, Richard, they're called abstractors. I think that's the term for them. But yeah, you're right. I've had to have those documents hand delivered as well. And you kind of roll your eyes going, oh my gosh, like really? Now you got to pay somebody to do this. You got to verify and check to make sure that it was done. And then they in turn have to mail it back into your curator or your custodian, the person that's handling the documentation. So that process, it can take a while, which is you always need to have details, and you always need to have documentation, and you always need to know where you left off at in what we'll call this post-closing world, because things can get lost and forgotten about very easily in this process.
Yeah, which is a good reason to have a custodian, like you and I both do. I mean, because if you're like me, you're busy and you forget that, ooh, this one document didn't get recorded, and guess what? You're out of luck.
Right. Right.
One thing I should add too, in terms of whether you want to jump into this or not, you have to look at who you are. And you have to say, am I really detail oriented enough
Yeah.
to keep track of all this? Not that you have to be extremely detail oriented, but you have to keep track of it. And so if you're somebody who's not, you have to set up the forms and formats to make it so that you'll be successful, number one. Number two is, if you have a significant other, can they help you out? I mean, a lot of people, I'm what I would say halfway detail oriented. And my significant other certainly could participate in the business and follow up on all of that for me. And that's if you can do a tag team like that, that's a great way to conduct this business.
It is. And it's like divide and conquer, right? You're taking all the responsibilities and you're shifting them to one person, and then you're doing some other things because you're better at those things than the other person is, just like you pointed out. So this whole process, like you said, Richard, it's always better to have a company that helps you get through that. Now you still have to manage that company, right, Richard? You still have to monitor what's going on, but it's a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
And they do this day in and day out, so they catch things that you normally wouldn't catch. So I always recommend to people, let someone else handle it. Can you afford to spend $100 and let someone else deal with that and track that for 6 weeks? And that, also including the recording fees and stuff like that. It's like, just let them handle it. Like, that's their job. I can focus on other things because I want return on my time. So you asked a question about, it depends on the individual. And you're exactly right, Richard. I don't know too many individuals that truly understand their time value if they want to do that themselves. And there are some people, if you have one or two notes and that's all you have right now, well, then that's, I get it. One or two, that's a totally different story to handle. When you have 5, 6, 7, 10, I think you said the magic number was 10, Richard, that's when you need help. That's when you need systems. You need a process. You need somebody to help coach you through what's going on. And so I thought that was a good point you brought up about the number 10. 10 or more.
So the job coaches will all tell you that you want to work on your business, not in your business.
Correct.
And so that's a problem I always have. And I imagine you do somewhat too, is I'm always trying to work on my business as much as I possibly can. And it's not always possible.
Right. Yeah, that leads a whole other paradigm there. We could talk about business and processes, but you're exactly right, Richard. So there are people that work in their business and people work on their business. And so all of us aspire to just work on our business instead of in our business. But when you're starting out, Richard, you got to figure out what is that business. Each note business is a little bit different. As you know, Richard, we can all get into different type of investments within note investing.
Right.
And we all specialize in certain things. There's mainly first liens, and then within first liens, there's performing and non-performing and sub-performing. And then there's also seller financing and creating notes as well. In seconds, there's all those things in the same thing. And the second lien market is a totally different market than the first lien market. The pricing is way different. The underwriting is way different as well. So you have to have specialized knowledge just to go after that market as well. So the real estate note business is such a niche business, but within that niche business, there are a lot of different facets and different ways you can go down and invest your money in what's comfortable for you. I tend to be on the performing side of things with having to do with seller financing. So I don't run across a lot of conventional loans. I just like the seller financing aspect of it. It's what I'm used to. It's what I like to do. A lot of other people, they just want to go after conventional loans, maybe just non-performing or maybe just seconds. It's all okay. It just depends when you start off. You got to figure out kind of where to go.
Right. And some of that is based on where you're geographically based too.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say, well, gee, I want to do performing because doesn't take as long as non-conforming or doesn't take as much time.
Non-conforming, right?
Yeah, right. Non-performing and conforming. But for instance, I'm out here in California, and it's tough for me to run a non-performing business because you have to be on top of it so much, because I can't, I can buy a non-performing note out here, but it's going to cost me $500,000 just for one note.
Right.
So that there are limitations based on where you're located.
Let's talk about that for a second, Richard. So we got non-performing note business, someone that specializes in just doing non-performing notes. So just to catch my listener up here. So a non-performing note is any note that has been delinquent or hasn't paid for at least 90, 91 days. We consider that non-performing. We don't see that one paying back in the future. So that business is interesting because you have to have patience in that business. So not every time, Richard, will we run into a situation to where we can have a non-performing note and we have a resolution within a couple of months. That typically doesn't happen, does it?
Typically doesn't happen, and you have to be able to determine whether somebody is dealing with you in good faith, or whether they're just jerking your chain and playing with you, and they don't really. I mean, I had one borrower who talked a good talk for a while, but as soon as I got into COVID, they stopped all their payments, and I realized much too late that they had trashed the house when they left. And, they were just bad players. And so you have to be willing to put up with all that.
That's interesting. So you have the borrower aspect of a non-performing loan that you got to deal with. And they're all, they're all understanding. They all get it. They all act like they want to help or they want to fix their situation. And you're right, Richard, when it doesn't benefit them in the future, when something else comes along with a new shiny object, they'll forget about that stuff, right? And they just walk away from it. I've had borrowers to where they're happy to sign over documentation to say, I'll sign over, I'll cancel the land contract, I'll sign the deed back over to you, no problem, I'll walk away. And they did what they said. They have other people that would say that, and then you don't hear from them for 6 or 7 months. And then, you're accruing all these bills from the county as far as, the utility companies, municipalities, and things like that. And then, so you have that aspect of it. You have the loan servicer aspect of it, Richard, the company that's kind of managing the collection of the payment and knowing what's going on with it. And you have to deal with them and manage them. And then you have, your other, especially when you have land contracts, which are, where you as a lender are on the deed and the borrower is gaining equitable title each time they make a payment. But then there is the enforcement of the county and the municipalities that you have to watch out for too. So it's like a 3-headed monster that you're kind of monitoring, and all these parts are moving and all these things are going in different directions. They can speed up for a couple of days and you're really involved. And then you might have a 3-week gap of time to where it's just crickets.
Right.
Like when you get the attorney involved and you're trying to go through foreclosure, you're trying to go through loss mitigation. I mean, there could be crickets because there's a time for it. There's a judicial process to it. There's all these things, and it's different for each county and each state.
Right. Very much so. And generally, I think most of the note investors that I know of, yourself included, want to help people to whatever degree they can. I mean, they realize that a lot of the people in these houses are living day to day. They've got good jobs, they're postal workers or they're or whatever, but they may or may not have a ton of money. And for instance, in one instance, I had a single mom who I really wanted to help. But I found out she was just lying to me. She sounded sincere and whatnot. And she'd said, oh, gee, I paid this and paid that. And I ended up, finding out that there was a $3,000 sewer lien on the property because she hadn't paid her sewers bills and water bills for the last 3 years. And that wasn't showing up on any of my screen. In other words, that's something the servicer doesn't collect. It just shows up as a lien all of a sudden on your property.
Right. They're not monitoring that stuff.
No.
It's not their job to monitor that stuff. It's their job to pay the escrow. When the escrow is being collected and they see that the insurance or the taxes need to be paid, then they take care of that, right? But they're not monitoring all that stuff. That's our job as a lender to make sure that the property, that our superior lien is first position and it stays in first position, right? Not these other liens that pop up on there that can kind of take that over or cloud that title.
Right.
So we got this non-performing part of this world. So to run a non-performing business, back to getting what I said before, it takes patience. And that's why it takes patience. You have to be able to manage the process. You have to have systems in place. And just imagine, Richard, those are just one-off case studies that we kind of alluded to, what we were talking about. Imagine doing 5, 10, 25, 30 of these at a time, 100 at a time. You need a good team to be able to manage that whole thing.
Right. Now, some of them are handled very, very easily. Some of them, they'll give you cash for keys. Whereas, as you know, they'll say, thanks very much. I can't make my payments. The keys are under the mat. I'll sign the building over to you and,
Right.
see you later. Sometimes it's that easy, but you can't count on that.
All right, Richard, it's time for some funny stories.
Okay.
Shooting off the hip here. I know you I didn't ask you this beforehand in our little get together, but what is one of the funniest stories that you've heard from a borrower on one of your notes that have either gone non-performing or you've bought and it was non-performing?
The funniest stories, you mean in terms of an excuse as to why?
It could be excuse. It could be the situation was just funny. You just, it baffled you and it's just laughable. Like, give me something here.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly funny, but I had one where it was the middle of a divorce, and the wife was living in the house. The ex-wife, she thought she had been given the house and as part of the divorce decree.
Uh-huh.
But what neither of them realized was that it was a contract for deed, and neither the husband nor the wife owned the property. I
That's
did
true.
as the owner. So he gave her something that he didn't own.
Oh, wow.
And she thought that she owned it until it came time to sell it. And then I said, no, I don't think so. I don't know what else is going on, but no. It happens.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see how that happens with the land contract. It can be confusing to the borrower. We've had recently people contact us and say, hey, look, we're trying to refinance the house, but they say that we don't own the property. I'm like, no, you own the property. And then I having the conversation with them and I understand what they're trying to do. I'm like, oh, okay. You mean I am on the deed, but you own the property. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So we got to go through a different set of documentation so they can go to their hopeful new lender. And so they can underwrite that file and get things through. It's just that land contract stuff is always kind of messy. We like to convert those to note mortgages when we can, or we like to write the note mortgage to begin with.
Yeah. So a lot of borrowers, if they want to refinance, for instance, I mean, rates have been down. So as you know, I've had a fair amount of runoff in my portfolio, which I think that's great for them. That means that they're qualifying for conventional loans. They're getting lower rates, but they'll go to their bank and they'll want to get a new loan, and the bank will say, well, you don't own the property. They go, oh, yes, I do. I'm living in it. Well, no, you don't. Your name isn't on title here. So they really have to go through a whole explanation process. I usually get a call from the bank of how we would handle this, and it all turns out in the end, but it can be a cumbersome process.
So quick little funny story for me is I had a note that kind of went non-performing, and finding out with the communication with the servicer to the borrower, it come to find out that they actually didn't live there. They moved somewhere else nearby within like a city or two, and their what do you call it? Their daughter or their relatives, their in-law relatives moved into the house, and they were like paying the mortgage payment to my borrowers, and my borrowers were supposed to be making the mortgage payment. Well, come to find out those people weren't paying them. So then my borrowers couldn't afford to pay me. And so that kind of process went on. And so it kind of got it figured out, and they agreed that the borrowers did that. They just want to sign the property over and they just don't want to deal with it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So then I'm having to communicate with them on trying to communicate to who's in the house, because I was told like there's an older man and woman, husband, wife that live there that are the parents of one of the husband that lives there with the wife and the kid and stuff. And they're like, yeah, they all got jobs. I don't know why they're not paying. And I'm like going, okay, it's going to be one of those. Right. But come to find out, they started moving out. And so when I found out that it was going to be this day, it was actually in January here, last month that they were supposed to be moved out and moved all their things out. I'm like, okay, great. So after they had moved out, whatever date that was, I sent a company over to go kind of secure the property, like change the locks and start to winterize it and just the normal things that you do with this, REO. And kind of find out they didn't really move any stuff out. They left the house with everything you can think of imaginable. Like imagine walking into a hoarder's house.
Yeah.
And you walk in the front door and you can't even open the door all the way up because there's just crap right behind the door.
Right.
Like children's toys, there's like clothes, there's like mattresses, there's like, drapery on the floor. There's some, broken furniture. There's, like I said, toys. There's, of course they left all the dishes there. I'm just thinking like, what the heck? So anyways, and the outside looked just as bad too, as far as leaving stuff around there. So now, this is why you want to send somebody out as soon as somebody's out of there so you can kind of assess the situation, because the county code enforcement, they could have been on it really quick and sent me a fine for making, for having this dilapidated property look like this. Right. But it's just funny how, you're told one thing, but the truth is another. So it's always trust, but verify. So get back to our conversation before, Richard, about, we always hear these stories from these people and you want to believe them and you want to, take them on their word, but, more than half the time after that, it's not really the same. It's not really the same case as what they pleaded before. Right. So it's trust, but verify, I guess, if I could leave any final words for today.
Right. So along that, I'll be quick with this story too. Along your same line that you had, a friend of mine bought a townhouse in Washington, D.C. that was REO. And it was occupied by a hoarder, and you had to, buy it as is. Okay, fine. So this hoarder was into collecting antiques, and he and his wife would go out in the countryside, and there was literally a 2-foot wide trail through the house that you could go. It was floor to ceiling with antiques. They had to go to the local Holiday Inn to take a shower because they couldn't get into the bathroom. And so he bought the house. Thank you very much. They took a lot of the antiques out. We're giving them to antique dealers, and they're making a modest amount off of those. There's nothing big, but he had rows and rows of books in the bookcases, old books, and he's taking these old books and throwing them into boxes, and he's taking them to Goodwill. And as he throws one of the books, 9 $100 bills comes out of it, and he's going, "Oh my God, I just sent 10 boxes of books to Goodwill."
Oh, jeez.
So needless to say, he went through all of the books and did actually find, I think, $4,000 or $5,000.
Holy cow.
This guy he just didn't believe in the bank, and that's where he was saving his money.
Holy cow. Well, there's some buried treasure right there, Richard.
Yeah.
All right, Richard, thanks for being on the podcast again today. We appreciate it and look forward to having you on again here in the future. And I'm Justin Bogard with BrightPath Notes, and this episode is brought to you by BrightPath Notes. So I'll see you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bank. We hope you learned something from today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us. Plus, check out our BrightPath Notes channel on YouTube and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Be the Bank and on Instagram at Be the Bank Podcast. Be the Bank is sponsored by BrightPath Notes. Thanks again for listening.